Men are quitting work forever and nobody knows why. I know why. Also by fads. It is just not worth it. There's nothing to get. Like, as a man, listen, okay? As a man, you want to feel powerful and capable. The problem is that right now is not... You're not able to do that, right? If you get a job, you are barely able to afford living by yourself already. You don't even need to think about a family, let alone a girlfriend, because you don't have the money for it. And that means that it is not worth it. You might as well live with your parents. That's what I see around men my age and younger men. I can tell, maybe different cultures, it might be different. Because in Germany and United States, we're kind of very close, interlinked to the problems. What happens in the United States is usually a prediction of what happens, for example, in Germany. It always comes a few months later, or years.
Men are quitting the workforce and nobody knows why. Since the 1950s, the number of prime-aged men, that is, men...
What the fuck? That is just up to 2014. This will get worse.
Between the ages of 25 and 54 that are participating in the workforce has steadily declined. This has persisted through times of recession, through times of economic growth, and everything in between. And today in America, they're missing around 5 million of these men from the workforce. These guys are not...
The thing is, like, you can go even further back, right? Not just workforce. You just need to look at graduation. How many men graduate middle school? How many men graduate high school? How many men graduate college? University. It's less and less. It's just because there's nothing out there to get, kind of. It's like a lot of other problems. For example, as a man, I'm not allowed to be competitive because that is supposed to be toxic. But if I'm not competitive, I can't achieve anything.
Counted in unemployment statistics because unemployment statistics only count people who are actively seeking work. There's also a problem globally. Around 1 in 5 young people around the world are NEETs, so they're not in education, employment, or training. And what's arguably more interesting...
I don't fall into that category.
Interesting is that if you look at the older people, their participation in the workforce has actually steadily increased over the last few decades. Over the last few decades, the number of men aged 60 to 64 who are in the workforce has increased by over 20 percentage points.
Yeah, but you can attribute that to... If you are old, for example here, you can't afford, like, dropping out of the workforce at 60 or 64. If anything, you might need to work more. So there's that.
You would expect these younger men to be healthier and better educated, and therefore be more willing to work. So where have these guys gone, and what does it tell us about the future and the present of work today? Well, there are some theories and we'll try and cover them. Let's try and find out. Other outlets have tried to write about this to varying degrees of success, in my opinion. Fortune magazine wrote a piece about these young men becoming NEETs, not in education, employment, or training. And notably, they didn't actually interview any NEETs, but they did interview people who worked in HR. And this was the explanation that they had to give for why so many young men were dropping out of the workforce. They want the dream job title, the perfect culture fit, and a supreme compensation package right out of the gate, he explains. Instead of being open to decent opportunities as stepping stones, a lot of them would rather ride the unemployment wave while holding out for that unicorn rule.
I disagree. The thing is, like, a lot of those companies, they want pretty much like a full worker already from like young men, right? They want work experience before I'm even allowed to work. Like, what am I supposed to do? So pretty much it's like, you want me to have work experience, but I'm not allowed to work because I don't have work experience. But in order to get work experience, I have to work. So what do I do? We have that here in Germany as well, where like, you're applying for a job, like even for an apprenticeship, and they want you to have some form of work experience. It's like, okay, bro, where are you going with this?
Personally, this explanation is kind of bullshit in my opinion. It's not that good of an explanation, and it doesn't even come close to explaining why this might be a trend that has lasted through several decades, through times of economic growth when opportunities were relatively abundant, and through times of recession when they are less abundant. This is very like avocado toast coded. They did not cook with this one. As I say, I think we can do a lot better. And we can do one thing that wasn't really done in this article, which is to investigate what the answers are when you actually just ask these young guys directly why they aren't working. That can be extremely enlightening. So, what are the answers that you get when you actually just ask young people directly why they're choosing not to participate in the labour force? If we exclude students from the equation, the biggest reason for prime age women is taking care of home responsibilities, which might not be that surprising. When we ask men why they aren't working, on the other hand, the number one reason comes out to be illness or disability. Even in the UK, you see that the people who aren't participating in the workforce largely report sickness as their main reason for being.
Yeah, either physical or mentally, which is why they're not participating. Interesting. I wonder where this is going.
Economically inactive. So what's happened? Have men just suddenly gotten really sick over the last 50 years? Are they faking it? Well, probably not faking it, because these men are subjectively at least reporting being less happy, more sad, and more stressed, even than unemployed men who are seeking work. Most of these guys, I would say, are legitimately unwell, but maybe not in the ways that you might necessarily expect at first glance. Nearly half of prime age men who are not in the labour force take pain medication on any given day. And of those guys, around 2/3 actually take prescription pain medication every day. I've talked briefly about the opioid epidemic and its effects, but they are.
I don't think that the pain medication is necessarily for the actual pain, for like physical pain. Is it to numb the feet, to numb yourself? Because I could see that.
Are super wide ranging. Since 1999, the number of men who report feeling pain has stayed constant, while the number of prescription opioids has tripled. The men who have dropped out of the workforce seem to be concentrated in areas that have really suffered from the opioid crisis. Labour force participation has fallen even more in US counties where more opioid pain medication is prescribed. However, these guys are surviving somehow, right? Because you can't survive without any money. Almost half of these people are on some form of disability insurance or some form of disability payment. And disability payments don't just cover physical ailments, but also mental health conditions. And around 1/3 of all disability payouts in the US, at least, go to people with some kind of mental health condition, whether that's a depressive condition, a
So the pain medication is for the mental health issues. Possibly. Very likely. To numb your feelings.
psychotic disorder or any other kind of mental disorder. A good chunk of these people are inactive, not because of necessarily just physical ailments, but because of mental health as well. You know, a little bit somber, but in the UK, suicide is actually the biggest killer of men under 50. Globally, men make up around 3/4 of all suicides. And mental health is like an important component to this. I think you can't ignore it. And therefore, it's not that surprising that people who choose to not participate in the workforce report really low levels.
And I listen to Talk Dr. K here and there, and he's like gamer therapist, kind of, more or less. And what he said pretty much is that men that end their lives, they're not sad, they're not depressed, they don't have depression. They end their lives because they genuinely believe that their life is no longer worth living. They show about 50% or something, I could be wrong. have shown no sign of mental illness in a way, at least depression. That is scary because that means that these men that take their lives, they don't suffer from not necessarily suffer from mental illness. Also, they also just don't believe that their life is worth living. That is scary.
Levels of emotional well-being and very little meaning from their daily activities. They're not quitting the workforce in order to be like freeloaders and to, live off the government purse. Rather, they're clearly unhappy in this state. Praise the Sun says, doesn't that mean they live in poverty? Yeah, they live in effective poverty because disability payments are not that great. However, I think it's impossible to talk about this without also talking about the experience of those people who have chosen to actively seek work and have found that the experience has been getting steadily worse and worse. We have phenomenons like job listings for positions that are just non-existent, and the overall level of competition has gotten harder and harder. Interview requirements are getting more strict, employment criteria is getting more strict, and that can definitely have an effect in making people feel just like disillusioned with the workforce more broadly. And many of them actually report that
You're like, how am I supposed to get a job if when graduating I am not even qualified to get a job? So either the work requirements need to go down or the education needs to go up. But it seems like requirement goes up. Education says the same.
that the lack of skills is the biggest barrier for them getting back into work on top of their illness or disability. Because once a person has been out of the workforce for any significant amount of time, it can feel like the skills gap simply widens every year, and it can make it more and more difficult for them to re-enter the workforce. The opportunities that they need, the entry-level jobs that they need, have effectively vanished and been replaced with jobs that require significant level of self-training. That's what's considered an entry-level job now. They basically don't have the skills to be able to re-enter the workforce because the jobs that would take people who wanted to re-enter, the entry-level jobs, have slowly been disappearing. You need like experience to get a job, but you need a job to get experience. And if you tap out of the workforce, you can rapidly end up in a situation where...
I wouldn't just say that. It's when you drop out of the workforce and you want to re-enter again, the skill set that you need for that, for example, you are a, I don't know, whatever, whatever, and you start as a whatever. Eventually you drop out of the workforce. Now that whatever at entry level starts to develop. So when you want to come back to that whatever, eventually, you no longer have the skill set, the full skill set that is required to work in whatever. If that makes sense.
You can't get back into work. And even if you can, those jobs might not be able to offer you the support, the insurance, or the pay to be able to compensate for whatever disability you may also have. So the jobs that are available are just a complete mismatch for what people actually need. The jobs that are available wouldn't incentivize them to return to work. They don't pay enough. They don't provide the right health provisions. Jobs that would match up with these people have disappeared. So you might wonder, right, bad mental and physical health are driving them out of the workforce. And, the geography of the opioid epidemic has driven people out of the workforce, as well as disability. But why is this trend flipped for older people then? Why are older people participating more and more in the workforce today than any time in the last few decades, despite the fact that they are more likely to be not fit to
I assume money. I assume money. Because it has become harder for older people to survive.
work more broadly, right? And, well, people smarter than me have also asked that same question. There's a big research project called the International Social Security Project, and the whole deal of these guys is to investigate different pension plans, state pension plans across the world, and figure out how that's been affecting people's decision to work. And basically, these older people are working because they have no choice. So these guys looked at 12 different countries, and up until the mid-90s, the number of older men in the workforce was steadily decreasing. These people were choosing to retire and they were able to retire. But since the 90s, the trend has been consistently upwards in this U shape across wealthy nations. Or these people are not working necessarily because they want to, but rather because they have to. In the study of 12 countries, they found that 9 countries raised the earliest age at which you can retire, and another 9 countries lowered the generosity of the benefits. But even when the raises came, they were typically harder to access because...
Which is, for example, here in Germany, the new people that enter the workforce pay the pension of the old people that leave. But if you don't have enough children, you don't have enough new people to enter the workforce, which means that you can't pay people's retirement, older people's retirement. So here they have to collect bottles and get a job.
One had to wait longer to be able to access them. A unique case goes on when you look at the US though, because the US hasn't actually had a major pension reform since the 80s. And yet they've still seen this same trend of older people spending more and more time in the workforce. Despite the fact that they haven't seen a pension reform, they have actually seen other kinds of reform, specifically to disability and unemployment insurance, which have gotten harder and harder to access. And these are obviously huge lifelines for elderly people. The US's decision to make disability and unemployment insurance more and more difficult to access has potentially begun to reverse the trend in younger men as well. Because if we look at the post-COVID information, you can see that since the pandemic, since the big dip in the pandemic, the number of men who are participating in the labour force has slowly started to increase. It's currently back to around like 2008 levels, which is still way, way below what it was in, the 90s and the early 2000s and any time before that. But American men are getting back to work. And this sounds like a good thing, right? It means that these people who were formerly NEETs are now actually like getting outside and socializing. But when you look at the numbers in terms of the disability statistics, I start to question how good of a thing this actually is. Because in the last 10 years, the number of men in the US on disability has dropped from 4.6 million to 3.7 million. Basically, 900,000 people are no longer claiming disability. And I'll let you decide if you think that 900,000 Americans have gotten suddenly healthier over the last decade.
Or have they died? It could be a mixture of both. But what is more likely?
I don't know. Labour force participation rates are increasing and disability insurance claimants are decreasing. But there's not much evidence to suggest that this is a result of people actually getting healthier. And rather, it seems to me to at least imply that it's a result of these benefits being simply more difficult to access. At least that's my speculation. So American men are getting back to work, but I don't know if this...
I think it's a mix of both. People getting back to work, people just dying, people not having access anymore.
Is necessarily a good thing. Like this issue here, this issue of men leaving the labour force is, I think, a stark reminder of the state of both physical and mental health in, the modern world today. But it's also, I believe, a signal of broader trends, of broader societal attitudes towards work more generally. Because there is a decent chunk of people who are healthy and still choosing to exit the workforce. These people are called in and outs and are willingly taking extended breaks from jobs in order to basically live off their savings and be able to actually have some breaks. I think particularly in the US, there's been a big shift away from finding identity through work. And this is something that has persisted across income levels. People who work long hours and earn high pay are starting to show similar patterns. And they are actually massively reducing their hours. And I think this is likely a holdover from the pandemic, when people realized that they could find a lot of joy in their life through things that weren't work. There is clearly a huge problem with physical and mental health, but if I had to give you like a little bit of optimism, it's that there appears to be a big shift away from trying to find identity through work. However, I don't know how much of this recent increase in labour force participation is something to be like celebrated, because unless this increase has come with an increase in physical health, an increase in mental health, and a reduction in opioid prescriptions, amongst a bunch of other things, then it seems to be a signal that those men are being effectively forced to go back to work, rather than being...
That means... Okay, let me finish first.
...in appropriate physical and mental condition to actually maintain a job for the long term?
That pretty much means that there's a good chunk of men out there that went back into the workforce sick, on pills, because they had no other choice. Um, this didn't go quite in there the way I expected, to be fair, because I expected it to go also into a bit more societal problems, but I guess not. But I expected this to go like into why these men like why these men are mentally ill and like or unwell and leave, right? Because for me, it's like I know of a lot of men that went out of the workforce because they saw no reason to work because they had nothing to work towards. But, huh? I guess I got something else, something that I didn't expect.